Here's a riddle for you. I'm always coming, but never arrive. I'm always there, but never stay. I'm always passing, but never go. What am I? Welcome to Walking Through the Word for today. We're at the end of John chapter 11. We're starting in verse 54 after a very highly difficult situation. Well, it wasn't a difficult situation for Jesus, but it was a difficult situation for the Pharisees and the religious leaders. They had just heard, and some of them even witnessed, the miracle of Lazarus coming back from the dead. And yet it did not change their mind. In fact, it made them even more resolute that Jesus needed to die. And so in verse 54, it says here that Jesus therefore no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. Now, why did Jesus do this? Was he afraid of the Pharisees? Certainly not. So then what was Jesus' motivation? Well, the answer is the same as the riddle. It was not yet his time. You see, time is something that God understands far better than any of us because, well, he created it. There was no time before he created it. And time is what Jesus used a lot of to recognize when he should do things. Time played a big part in why he stayed in Bethany for 2 days. Time played a big part in his arrival to heal the blind. But several times, Jesus made statements in his ministry where it was not yet his time. This is the reason why Jesus withdrew. It wasn't because he was afraid of the crowds. It wasn't because he was afraid of the Pharisees. It wasn't because he changed his message or his boldness. Instead, it was a recognition that the time had not yet arrived. And so he went there to stay with his disciples. Now, we don't know what he did in that period, but I would imagine it was further equipping of his disciples. The time was coming soon for Jesus. See, Jesus, even being God, recognized that time was fleeting in this case. It was coming. It was getting closer. It was passing. Yet it just was moving a little too fast. And in verse 55, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremony of cleaning before the Passover. Before the Passover is important. They kept looking for Jesus. And as they stood on the temple courts, they asked one another, well, what do you think? Is he coming to the festival at all? But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus should report it so that they might arrest him. So we're setting the scene for what is about to happen. Because over the next few chapters of John, we're going to see the time is finally approaching. That Jesus is no longer going to be hiding or avoiding the persecution of the Pharisees and the religious leaders. Jesus is now going to, well, embrace it. Not gladly, not joyfully, but willingly. Jesus is ready. And so we see at the beginning of chapter 12 in verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came back to Bethany. Remember, Bethany's only 2 miles away from Jerusalem, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead, in case we didn't remember. And here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, poured it on Jesus' feet, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, why was this a significant scene? The subtitle says Jesus was anointed at Bethany. But there's a few things about this that we need to recognize. First of all, perfume was used another time on Jesus, and then another time before that. We know that there's another instance where a woman wiped Jesus, weeping with tears. We don't know if that was this same instance. It could be. But regardless, there was another time when Jesus was given expensive perfume, and that was at his birth: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, the reason why this is significant is because perfume was often used in burial rites to help with the stench of the decaying body. So this was a foreshadow, if you will, of what Jesus was about to endure and what was about to be. But it also demonstrated Mary's love for Jesus, her desire to follow Jesus, because this wasn't just any perfume. This was an expensive perfume, as Judas in verse 4 is so quickly able to point out. Why wasn't this perfume sold? He's pretending to be altruistic. and the money given to the poor. It was worth a year's wages. Of course, John says he didn't care about this. He cared about the poor because he was a thief. He wanted to keep the money for himself. Jesus basically tells him, leave her alone. This was intended to prepare for my burial. You'll always have poor among you, but you will not always have me. So Jesus is basically being anointed here by Mary, who's showing her devotion and love by giving such an expensive gift to Jesus, saying, Jesus, you are far more valuable than anything that I have, including this. Something that Judas completely missed. Something that we could completely miss. It's just the reality of life that we can miss God if we're not paying attention, that we can find other things more valuable than God. This is why it's important for us to have what we call an eternal perspective. The idea that we need to be living towards the end, towards this, what we have here, as many people say, this is front porch. This is just the introduction. At some point, we're going to enter into the doorway of eternity. But what do we find valuable? Do we find it valuable like Mary found Jesus valuable, or do we find him conveniently valuable? Food for thought.